Guys, my name is Carolyn and welcome to my channel C to C. Here we can talk about some of the gossip and notoriety surrounding some of U.S. history's lesser known figures and take a glimpse into their exciting and often drama-filled lives. If you, like myself, are interested in historical lives and legends, make sure to like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you can be alerted when I drop new content every week. So guys, get comfy for story time. We're going to talk about one of the lesser known Old West outlaws, Thomas Blackjack Ketchum. Warning. The subject matter in this video may be sensitive and includes violence and self-harm. Viewer discretion is advised. Thomas Blackjack Ketchum was born as Thomas Edward Ketchum in San Saba County, Texas, on Halloween night in 1863. He was born into a hard-working family headed by his father, Greenberry Ketchum Sr., pictured here on the bottom right, and his mother, Temperance Catherine Whittick Ketchum, pictured here on the bottom left. The couple would have a large family of 8 children. However, only 5 of those 8 children would survive into adulthood. Thomas was the last born. According to some sources, Tom was reported to have been a quiet and observant child, but he had a mischievous side. As Tom grew, he developed a really close bond with his second older brother Samuel, pictured here on the right, next to their father, Greenberry Sr. A few years after Thomas was born, fortunes for the family turned sour. On October 28, 1868, just 3 days before Tom's 5th birthday, his father, Greenberry Sr., passed away, and unfortunately there's not much information about what caused his death. The family's bad luck continued when another 5 years later, Thomas's mother, Temperance, or Tempa as her family called her, would follow in her husband's footsteps and pass away. It is believed that Temperance lost her life to an illness that caused her to go blind a few years before her death. Her departure left Thomas and his 4 other siblings, Greenberry Jr., Elizabeth, Samuel, and Nancy, orphaned. Their deaths left the oldest son, Greenberry Jr., who was called by his middle name, Barry, pictured here on the far left, as the head of household. This also meant that because of Barry's hereditary seniority, he inherited all of his parents' estate, leaving his other siblings with no inheritance. Along with the family home and business, Barry inherited responsibility of his younger brother Thomas. Their deaths, Barry was 13 years older than Tom, and because of their age difference, he treated Tom more like a dependent son than a brother. The combination of subordinate treatment and the fact that Barry inherited all of their family's property would be a source of resentment with Tom. However, the bond between Tom and his brother Sam remained strong. It is no surprise then that Thomas and Samuel were rebellious and were considered wild teenagers. By the time Tom was 16, he and Sam had set out as cowboys, traveling between Texas and New Mexico. The two reveled in the traveling lifestyle. They were known for gambling, and Thomas was said to have become a catch with the ladies. They were even known to have gambled with other Wild West cowboys, like the infamous Billy the Kid. Their lifestyle of drinking, gambling, and seduction was not easily supported by their honest ranch hand earnings. As sufficient money was sometimes challenging to come by, the two brothers would resort to petty theft and robbery, usually as a means of keeping up with their raucous manner of living. According to gossip at the time, the two brothers were very impressionable and idolized the escapades of another pair of outlaw brothers, pictured here, Frank and Jesse James. And while their older brother Barry built wealth in their family business, Thomas and Sam rebelled and chased more nefarious opportunities. Thomas and Samuel's petty crime spree continued throughout their young adulthood, and they were even charged for a couple of small time holdups. In 1889, a new sheriff was appointed to Tom Green County, Texas, where the Ketchum family had been relocated by Barry, who had moved in pursuit of larger cattle. The first person that the sheriff arrested was Thomas for the offense of chasing a dog down the aisle of a church while service was in session. Now, today, something like that would be seen as amusing, but at the time, it was highly frowned upon. His brother Barry found this particularly annoying because he was married to the sheriff's daughter. According to stories told by the family, these circumstances led to Barry kicking his younger brother out of his house for good, driving a deeper rift between the two of them that would continue for years. And when Thomas left, Samuel went with him. In this picture, you can see Thomas seated on the bottom left and Samuel up in the upper right-hand corner with his hand placed on his brother's shoulder. These two were as thick as thieves for the better majority of their lives. The two Ketchum brothers weren't too worried about displacement from their brother's home because the transient lifestyle suited them best. For the next few years, between cattle herding jobs, they would commit small holdups and robberies. They stole enough money to maintain what at the time would have been considered a pretty flashy lifestyle. The men would spend their loot on clothes and horses, which really built up their reputation with the women in the different towns they visited. They would find a thrill in pursuing the women of the town, taking them dancing and partying, and even spending some of their stolen earnings on women they particularly favored. And they had no shortage of interest from the opposite gender. Physically, Tom towered over other men. He stood at 5 foot 11 inches, which was almost 6 inches taller than most other men at the time. As a result of working in the cattle industry nearly all his life, he was muscular and brawny. He had a suntan acquired from spending the days in the hot Texas and New Mexican sun. Sam and Tom would take pleasure in gambling and boozing and seducing the townswomen from state to state. They would frequently visit settlements between Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and Colorado. Physically, the petty crime cowboy lifestyle seemed to have been serving the pair quite well until Thomas became bored with small-time jobs. He was probably motivated by the stories of train heists and holdups that had yielded outlaws before him large sums of money. Whatever the reason, Tom decided to test the waters, and his first attempt at accosting a train came in 1890. The story goes that Tom hid behind a pile of railroad ties, similar to those pictured here, near a stationary train where an engineer was bent over working on the train wheels. Ketchum pulled out his pea shooter and aimed it at the backside of the train engineer and started firing pellets at his rear end. While this may have seemed like a harmless prank, the train engineer did not find it very amusing and reached for his own, very real firearm, causing Thomas to flee. This would be the most innocent of encounters with Thomas any train engineer would have from this point forward. The story goes, over the next couple of years, Thomas and Sam would be joined in their criminal enterprises by Will Carver and David Atkins. Sam and Will are pictured here in the bottom left and right. In 1892, it is said that Tom and his gang robbed their first train. It was headed northwest from Atchison, Kansas to Deming, New Mexico, with a large sum of money in the safe. Ketchum and his gang held the train up on a stretch of track near Nutt, New Mexico. They blew the safe and rode away with over $20,000 in tow. Today, that would equate to something like $690,000. Thomas and his band would then lay low for a couple of years, likely spending a majority of their wealth on gambling, alcohol, and women. The next time Tom and his band really made headlines again was in 1895. Blackjack, as he was now called, made his way back home to Texas, where his brother Sam proposed he reconnect with his oldest brother Barry. It seems that Barry was open to reconnecting, partially out of obligation, and partially because he was aware of the wealth that Tom and Sam had acquired from their criminal escapades. Whatever the reason, Thomas and Sam and their bandmates resumed living on the Ketchum property in San Angelo, Texas, and this is where Tom's first deadly crime would be committed. The Ketchum's neighbor, John N. Powers, owed Thomas a sizable gambling debt. Additionally, according to some rumors and records, John was said to have been unkind to his wife, who may have incentivized Tom to go after her mean-spirited husband. Whether it was a hit ordered by the wife or retaliation for unpaid debts is not certain, but nonetheless, John Powers was found shot down on December 12, 1895, not far from the Ketchum family home. Tom, Will, and David quickly fled from Texas after being indicted, and John's wife was arrested. Tom ran to New Mexico, while Will and David ran to Arizona. He didn't stay concealed for long. Just a half a year after the death of John Powers, Blackjack made headlines again when he and his brother Sam robbed a Liberty, New Mexico general store, which was owned by a man named Levi Herstein. Rightfully, Levi was angry after being robbed by Tom and Sam and decided to get a group of men together to trail the two brothers. A few hours later, Tom and Sam were eating dinner at a nearby saloon when Levi and his group rode up on them and a shootout ensued. When all of the firing had ended, Levi Herstein was left deceased, and the Ketchum brothers fled yet again and were never charged for their crime. Now, we don't know if it was because they had spent most of the money they acquired from their first train heist, or if they just got bored of small-time stick-ups, but Tom, Sam, and their band decided to get back into the train robbing business. At about 2 a.m. on May 14, 1897, Tom and his men stopped a train in southern Texas. Tom and Will held up the engineer of the train at weapon point, forcing them to stop the train a mile ahead. When the train came to a stop, they were met by David, who had already cut railroad communication lines and boarded the train with a sizable amount of dynamite. You see, on board this train was a safe containing a reported $42,000, which in today's currency would be equivalent to over $1 million. Ketchum and his men held the train up for more than 2 hours while they used explosives to blow the safe open, and eventually the three of them rode away with the total sum of money in the safe. At this point, summer had moved in, and the group of men found refuge in a hideaway cave somewhere near the border of New Mexico and Colorado. Tom and his gang relaxed in this cave for the rest of the summer and made plans for their next heist. As fall rolled around, the men decided to get back to their criminal antics. On the night of September 2nd, 1897, Tom and his band camped outside of a village in New Mexico called Folsom. They'd gained intel about a train headed their way from Denver, Colorado, on its usual 36-hour route to Fort Worth, Texas. This train was the Texas Express No. 1, and it was scheduled to leave Denver's Union Station at 10 a.m. sharp. At 9:10 p.m., the Texas Express No. 1 stopped briefly in Folsom, where Tom and his crew had been camping out. Tom and Will boarded the train quietly, and the train continued its trip as the passengers began to settle down to sleep for the night. The train came upon a bend near Twin Mountain and decelerated. This was Tom and Will's cue, and the two of them snuck into the cab of the main train and held the engineer at weapon point, ordering him to stop 2 miles ahead. Once the train was stopped, Sam and David climbed aboard and attempted to blow the safe, but the task proved to be more difficult than expected. Eventually, one of the robbers loaded the safe with 14 sticks of dynamite and destabilized the explosive with condensation from a slab of beef. The resounding explosion was huge and undoubtedly terrified the train passengers that had fallen asleep and were unaware of the heist taking place. The explosion didn't just blow the safe open, but it blew out the entire side of the train car. Their loot was much less than with their previous train robberies. This time, they rode away with $3,000 to split between the four of them, and in today's figures, that would still amount to some $105,000. Word about their most recent train holdup spread quickly, and posses were dispatched by law officers from New Mexico, Texas, and Colorado to track down and find the now outlawed bandits. Because of this, Tom and his gang fled again in opposite directions. They were not separated for long, and in December of 1897, the group set their sights on another holdup job on a railroad at Steins Pass on the Arizona-New Mexico border. They first robbed the Southern Pacific train station and walked away with a small payout of $12.25 and a .44 Winchester rifle. Not expecting any trouble, the band of outlaws traveled about a mile down the tracks where they waited to take control of the train. But the railroad had planned ahead for their attempt and doubled up on the amount of guards that they had on the train. Instead of an unwitting train engineer, Tom and his crew were met with the firepower of several armed guards. A shootout ensued, and a newer addition to their group named Ed Cullen died. The gang retreated without any success. But the railroad... Again the group fled, this time back down to Val County, Texas, where they had gotten word that another group of outlaws had made out with a large amount of money after holding up a Southern Pacific train. At the time, train robbers made a practice of striking where other outlaws had had success, so Blackjack and his crew made the decision to hold up the Southern Pacific number 20 train. In April of 1898, two members of Tom's band stowed away in the coal car of the Southern Pacific number 20 train. And when the train departed from the station, they crawled out of the coal car, forced the train to stop, and disconnected the express car from the body of the train. They then applied a large amount of dynamite to the car and lit the fuse. The resulting explosion was so large it blew a giant hole in the roof and splintered the sides of the express car. Tom's men rummaged through the debris and grabbed all of the valuables and money they could and then disappeared into the night without Tom being anywhere in sight. Thomas may have felt like he'd been betrayed by the two crew members robbing that train on their own, and he became more authoritative and moody. His temper and mood swings eventually resulted in the gang's dismemberment. Even Samuel, Thomas's loyal brother and closest ally, abandoned him to form a new gang with Will Carver at his side. Sam and Will's crew attempted several failed robberies, one of which resulted in a shootout with law enforcement that claimed Will Carver's life. Sam and his gang again tried to rob the Texas Express on July 11, 1899. Although the heist was actually successful, a posse of law enforcement chased them down and Sam suffered a shot to the arm. The wound grew infected, but Sam refused amputation, and the wound claimed his life on July 24, 1899. Meanwhile, Tom was on his own and was not aware of the July 11th train robbery or of the death of his brother. And he had also devised a plan to hold up the Texas Express. This would be the third time that Blackjack would attempt to rob the Texas Express. He camped beside the tracks at Twin Mountain on the night of August 16, 1899, awaiting a train traveling southbound. When the train stopped briefly in Folsom, New Mexico, Thomas stowed away in the coal car. In the middle of the ride, Thomas entered the cab car and focused his firearm on the engineer. However, he did not account for a male clerk in the baggage car who intuitively sensed that something was wrong. The male clerk stuck his head out of the baggage car to see what was going on, and it startled Thomas, who fired his weapon at the male clerk, taking off part of his jaw. Although gravely injured, the male clerk was still alive and warned the train conductor named Frank Harrington that someone was attempting to rob the train again. Frank had actually been present on the train during the first two robbery attempts involving Blackjack, and he was not going to let him get away with another. Grabbing his firearm, Harrington fired at Tom, hitting him with several buckshot pellets just above his right elbow. Tom fled the scene, bleeding profusely. The next day, sheriffs caught up with Ketchum, who had been slowed down due to massive blood loss. He was arrested and taken to a hospital in Trinidad, Colorado, where he was treated for his injuries. The doctors determined that the arm was too damaged, and like with Sam, it was recommended that they amputate. Tom had no interest in being taken into custody or having his arm amputated, and he instead attempted to take his own life. His attempt failed, and he was taken to Santa Fe prison, where his arm was forcefully amputated without any anesthesia or painkiller. On September 6, 1900, Thomas stood trial in Clayton County, New Mexico. The jury unanimously declared him guilty for his crimes, and his hanging was scheduled for October 5, 1900. Although Thomas and his gang were some of the most feared outlaws in the West at the time, he is remembered less for his heists and scores and more for how his life ended. There had been debates about the proper length of rope needed for Tom's execution due to his large size and weight. They finally decided on a rope that measured at 5 feet 9 inches, which was 2 inches shorter than Tom's height. His one remaining arm was chained to his leg, and the sleeve of his shirt that would have held his other arm was left hanging and blowing in the wind. The sheriff, who was allegedly drunk at the time, swung his hatchet as the trap door beneath Ketchum's feet gave way. The combination of short rope, Thomas's weight, and the sudden release of the trap door resulted in Tom's head being separated from his body. A Denver Post reporting describes the scene like this. Every one of the large crowd within and without the stockade held their breath, and their hearts gave a bound of horror when it was seen that his head had been severed from his body by the fall. His body alighted squarely upon his feet, stood for a moment, swayed, and fell. And then great streams of red blood spurted from his severed neck, as if to shame the very ground upon which it poured. Every face turned pale. The head rolled aside, and the rope, released, bounded high in the air and fell with a thud on the scaffold. The head was sewn back on the trunk, and the body immediately prepared for burial. As you can imagine, Tom's death was shocking for viewers, even at that time. It was rare, if ever, that an execution by hanging resulted in a decapitation, and word of his execution and how he died spread through the whole West. Tom left behind a dark and thrilling legacy of crime, plunder, and wild adventures, but his true fame occurred as a result of his botched execution. The engravement on his tombstone sums it up best. It reads, "Tom and brother Sam chose the outlaw trail and paid the ultimate price. Sam was shot by a posse and is buried in Santa Fe, and Tom was hung in Clayton and is buried here." And that's all that I have for you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope that you guys found this topic really interesting. Personally, I found it interesting that Tom and Sam Both suffered similar injuries when they were attempting to rob the same train at different times. I thought that was a little bizarre. When I was researching this subject, I couldn't help but think that this was like a real life movie. And even that Tom fits that blueprint of the archetypal Wild West outlaw. So, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that Tom got what he deserved? Do you think that he should have gotten a more lenient sentence? He was one of the only outlaws that was executed for his involvement in train robbery. Do you have any other Wild West outlaw topics that you would love me to cover? I would love to go over some of your topics and do an episode on something that we all find interesting. So please drop your suggestions and conversations in the comments. I will be going through the comments so that I can see what you guys have posted there and to respond to some of you guys. I hope that you like what I have had for you today. And if you did, please make sure to hit that like button so that we can cover more stories like this from sea to shining sea. I can't wait to see you next week. Bye.